Mercedes is approaching the Suzuka GP with a lot on their plate, and it seems like the bad news won't end anytime soon. After Wolff's latest statements coming from the double DNF finish in Melbourne, only a few believe that Mercedes has what it takes to turn their fortunes around, but with the latest discovery from James Allison, could we see an improved version of the W15 further down the road? And more importantly, how will this translate between the current lineup of drivers? Now, Mercedes hope that the 2024 design renewal will put them up in the mix with Red Bull and Ferrari, but what it effectively did was put them in the midfield as all things stand, fighting with Aston Martin for P4 in the Constructors' Championship. The worst start of the season is very unlikely to improve in Suzuka, a track that's full of what the W15 despises the most, and that is the high-speed corners. The majority of them do have an effect on how the car behaves on the track. And with Mercedes' latest comments regarding the results they're receiving from the wind tunnel and translating them on the track being vastly desynchronized, it seems like we'll be seeing a lot of struggles from both Hamilton and Russell. After failing to understand the aerodynamic concept of their car in a couple of consecutive seasons, Mercedes are now struggling to get a hold of the new concept of their car. And according to Allison, the technical director of the team, this issue will continue in the upcoming races as well. When talking about the current issues plaguing the performance of the W15, James Allison went on to say, "In simple terms, we're still seeing problems with wind tunnel data not correlating with on-track performance. There are always correlation issues in every year and every team, and there always will be correlation issues between what you see in the factory and what you see on the track, because the factory is a sort of reduced version of reality. It's not the same as driving a car on a real track, on the actual asphalt of the actual circuit, with all its infinite detail and complexity." However, one couldn't help but note that this does sound like a bit of an excuse, and we didn't hear for it from any other team. On the contrary, McLaren have used the time in the wind tunnel in order to bring a lot of competitive upgrades to both of the 2023 and 2024 challenges, and they're now effectively the third fastest team on the grid, despite starting the 2023 campaign on the back foot. Ferrari, on the other hand, is looking to introduce upgrades that were tested successfully in the wind tunnel back in Maranello and try to close the gap to Red Bull as much as they can in Suzuka. So saying that there will always be correlation issues between the wind tunnel and the performance of the car might not do the job for Mercedes at this point in their existence. Furthermore, Allison opened up about the struggles that Mercedes is facing when it comes to extracting more performance out of the car on paper, because that's where all things start. And when talking about some of the primary points of this issue, Allison added, "If you conclude, having exhausted the degrees of freedom that you have available to you in setup terms, that you still need to go further, well then that gets harder at that point, because that will mean that there are underlying characteristics in the aerodynamic map that you've engineered or the suspension characteristic that are aggravating that particular feature. And in order to make it really heal up nicely, you would have to change those underlying features. It can be either quick and dirty or a little more involved and a bit more complicated." What's very hard for Mercedes to swallow from Suzuka onwards is that not only will they struggle with the high-speed corner nature of the track, but the upgrades that are coming to Ferrari, Red Bull and McLaren are set to even further deepen the gap between these four squads. All of the other challengers have already set sail when it comes to having a stable platform and building from that point onwards. Whereas Mercedes admitted that all they will do from this point on is experiment with the car and try to magically find half a second of performance because, as Wolff said, ultimately there is nothing wrong with the car, but there's something wrong with the management of it, and that's the root cause of all their issues. Elaborating on what the plan for the W15 is from this point on, Wolff went on to say, "I think we're coming to a point now where we probably need to experiment with every single race. Not only on Friday, then we're good on some of the sessions on Saturday, but the more grip we have, the faster it goes, the more we reach the performance ceiling of the car, and our data shows that it's not the ceiling. I've not lost the feeling that there is a good car, because there are sessions throughout the weekend, and also the last two ones, where we absolutely smash it in terms of performance, and then we lose it again." Well, this is all forcing Lewis Hamilton to experiment with the setup of his car, and the fans have raised the question as to whether or not he'll be the sole driver to apply these experiments. And the answer to that question is plain and simple: yes. He's the only one struggling to find performance from the car, and although Russell battling Alonso for P6 in Melbourne wasn't actually the most competitive version that Mercedes could have set the ceiling to, The younger Brit is adamant that he's not feeling the issues that Hamilton is, which is pointing towards a scenario where Mercedes have started to move away from Hamilton's preferences more and more after his latest bombshell move to Ferrari from 2025 onwards. What's worth mentioning is that it's not just Mercedes that feels the car is behaving poorly from one day to another at the same circuit. Some of the Sky F1 pundits feel like the situation is so bad that the W15 is having different fluctuations from one corner to another. Now, considering the amount of downforce that the car would need to handle itself properly in the first sector in Suzuka, which is full of these long and high-speed corners, it's safe to say that neither Russell nor Hamilton would have the confidence to push the car to its absolute limit. And if we are to see what happened in Jeddah, it's likely to conclude that Mercedes will lose a lot of time in the first sector here, which would cause turmoil for the rest of the track as well. On top of that, Hamilton is now entering the fourth race of the season in his personal worst start of a campaign, even adding that the 2009 campaign felt a bit better than this one. Regardless of that, Mercedes are not willing to give up on trying to find more performance from the car. And there is one thing that is pushing them to believe that this version of the Challenger is still worth exploring even more, and that's Russell's statement. When talking about the W15, the Brit went on to say that he does not feel what Hamilton feels in the car, which while could be understood as bad news too, due to the fact that it was Russell who felt more comfortable with the troublesome version of the Mercedes cars in the previous couple of seasons, could still mean that Mercedes is not losing hope when it comes to close fights in the next couple of seasons. Keep in mind that the cars that the teams are going to build this season are going to remain more or less the same for the upcoming campaign as well. So, be that as it may, this would be a huge test for Mercedes to attract a solid driver next to Russell from 2025 onwards. Elaborating on the current struggles of the car, Russell went on to say, "I'm definitely not having the fluctuations in confidence or performance on my side of the garage or in my car compared to what Lewis is experiencing. I'm reasonably happy with how the car is handling, we just don't quite have the performance." Well, Hamilton won't be the happiest driver in Suzuka or in the remainder of 2024. And after his smile when Ferrari concluded the 1-2 win in Melbourne last week, we can already sense where his mind currently stands, eagerly waiting for the 2024 season to end and for him to focus on the 8th championship with the Maranello squad. But this translated bad news for Mercedes much more than they could originally anticipate, because once Hamilton stops caring about developing the car, which is very likely to have already happened after the first 3 rounds of the 2024 calendar, then you have a lack of knowledge and expertise back in the factories of Brackley and Brixworth. And with this in mind, the 2025 seat might not be the most attractive one for drivers of the caliber of Alonso or Sainz. So with this in mind, what do you think the Suzuka race holds for Mercedes? And more importantly, do you think that they have what it takes to turn things around in 2024? Let us know in the comments down below.